Most people imagine that suffering comes from not seeing enough. The deeper risk is what happens when you see too much, too clearly, too soon. If you're the one who notices patterns others miss, you know the cost. The air in the room shifts, faces harden, and you start to feel like a problem rather than a person. Stay with me. By the end of this episode, you'll know how to carry that kind of vision without burning out, how to keep relationships intact while refusing to go blind, and how to turn a painful gift into a disciplined craft. Here's the terrain we'll walk. We'll translate Jung's core ideas into plain language: persona and shadow, inflation and participation, mystique, anima and animus, individuation, and the self, and use them to decode why the seer so often gets scapegoated. We'll trace what happens in a team, in a relationship, and in a creative life when one person starts perceiving what the group is organized to ignore. Early on, I'll plant a reveal we'll flip later. The clearer your perception becomes, the more your ego is tempted to identify with it. That identification feels like strength, but quietly reproduces the very blindness you're trying to expose. We'll end with a humane protocol you can apply this week to protect your nervous system, preserve connection, and still tell the truth. Let's orient. Jung wasn't cataloging a disorder when he wrote about people who are unusually perceptive. He was mapping a developmental tension. Some psyches are tuned to pick up the signals beneath the signals. Unspoken grief under a polished meeting. Envy hiding behind a joke. A family myth that protects love by refusing history. He suggests that perception is not the problem. The problem is proportion. What the ego does with what it sees, how quickly it moves, and whether it stays in relationship to the image that emerges rather than fusing with it. When perception outpaces integration, the seer becomes a mirror nobody asked for. When integration catches up, the same person becomes a bridge. First, our vocabulary. Persona is the mask we wear to belong. Helpful in public, limiting in excess. Shadow is everything the mask leaves out, not only the dark impulses we deny, but also the bright capacities we never learned to own. Anima and animus are inner figures, the feeling-toned images of the feminine in men and the masculine in women, that shape how we idealize, react, and relate. Psychological inflation is what happens when the ego grabs onto something larger than itself, truth, role, cause, and swells beyond proportion. Participation mystique names that fused, trance-like state in which individuals and groups unconsciously share moods and meanings. It's the tide you swim in without knowing there's a current. The self is the deeper organizing center of the psyche that seeks wholeness. And individuation is the lifelong process of becoming more whole by relating consciously to what was previously unconscious. Now, a work scene. Imagine a product team proud of speed and disruption. Their persona is heroic. We move fast and change the world. You're the analyst who notices a hard pattern in churn data. The story marketing tells, sets expectations the product can't meet in the first 3 months. You share it. The temperature drops. You're thanked for your thoroughness and quietly labeled negative. What happened? Your data pulled a strand from the group's mask. The shadow, fear of being ordinary, grief about limits, got stirred. The group defended the mask by projecting discomfort onto you. You felt it. A push to either dim your insight to keep belonging, or push harder and become the scold. Here the real danger begins, because a third option is harder. Stay in relationship to the image you found without becoming it. Shift to a relationship. Two partners look perfect on paper. They solve things by talking. They never raise voices. They coach their friends on conflict. One partner begins to sense a quieter truth. The other's smile hides resentment about unequal momentum at work. The hunch arrives before the confession. Days fill with micro-signals. Timing that's just off. A celebration that turns analytic too quickly. If you're the early seer here, you face a double bind. Speak too directly and you look superior. Stay silent and you carry the secret alone. Jung would say your animus or anima colors the pace. One person's inner figure metabolizes emotion fast, the other's does it slow. If you mistake speed for virtue, inflation sneaks in through righteousness. If your partner mistakes slowness for failure, shame rises and fights the mirror. Now, a creativity story. A filmmaker crafts a documentary about a revered elder. Everyone expects a hagiography. Funders love resilience. In the footage, the artist notices moments where charm edges toward control, where a proverb silences a younger person's pain. The truer film lives in that tension. Friends warn her not to stir up trouble. She edges toward honesty and finds a new impulse. Not just to show complexity, but to punish. That's the shadow turn. The obvious barrier is external pressure. The deeper obstacle is internal. Part of her wants to weaponize truth to settle an old score. When she names that part, she can still tell the hard story, but her tone changes. The film becomes exacting and compassionate rather than exacting and cold. Same perception, different proportion. These snapshots expose a pattern. Seeing more breaks the trance that keeps groups coherent. Trance breaking triggers projection. You become the stand-in for whatever the group cannot bear. If you fuse with the role of the one who sees, you drift into inflation. If you collapse to keep the peace, you betray yourself. The path through is narrow. Relate to the image you've found as a third thing between you and others, rather than using it as a weapon or hiding it like contraband. Part of why this is hard is biological. Your nervous system spikes the moment you sense a truth that could threaten belonging. Heart rate increases, jaw tightens, breath shortens. If you misread this arousal as license, you push too hard. If you misread it as danger, you go quiet. Practice adds a third choice. Register your activation, slow your delivery, and keep both truth and connection in view. That's not performance. It's stewardship. Many of you will recognize yourselves in one of a few characteristic blends. Some of you are feelers who perceive what's going on by absorbing it. You don't just see distress, you taste it. Walk into a room and your body tells you whose heart is heavy before anyone speaks. The gift is empathy. The risk is emotional contagion. Others are thinkers whose pattern recognition is eerily predictive. You name the shape of a conflict months ahead. Sketch the failure point in a plan, and later people say you were negative when you were simply early. Your gift is clarity. Your risk is coldness, or the performance of certainty. Some of you sense the state of others through the body. Subtle tension, fatigue, illness as it's forming. Long before words gather. Your gift is early warning. Your risk is hypervigilance. A rarer few see everything, but can't organize it fast enough to communicate cleanly. Your gift is scope. Your risk is overwhelm. No one is only one of these. They are currents that run through you with different strengths at different seasons. Knowing your blend helps you design guardrails that fit your actual nervous system rather than an idealized self. Why do the most perceptive people so often get punished for accuracy? Jung points to shadow dynamics. Groups disown what threatens their persona and assign it to a member who can carry it. The seer becomes a psychological landfill for what the room can't process. That's why you might be accused of creating negativity when you're describing it, or of starting drama when you're naming it. There's also the problem of the superior function. The thing you do best can take the wheel, and the rest of you disappears behind it. When perception becomes identity, you stop being a person in dialogue and become a role in a morality play. We promise to flip. Clearer perception increases the temptation to identify as the seer. Identification feels like integrity, but it's actually a loss of proportion. The ego borrows the light of insight and says, "This is me." Once that happens, your face and voice change. You sound as if you're carrying a verdict rather than participating in discovery. People stop feeling invited and start feeling judged. Same content, different stance. The stance is what determines whether a group can metabolize what you bring. So what turns raw perception into something livable? Integration is not a slogan. It's a sequence of moves that honor both truth and relationship. Begin by quietly naming the mask in play to yourself. A team might be in heroic disruptor mode. A couple might be in we never fight mode. A family might be in we survive together so we don't revisit the past mode. This slows your reactivity. It reminds you that masks serve purposes even when they limit. Next, create a small container where the image you've found can live outside of you. A short memo with one dataset and a generous question. A sentence from a dream offered without interpretation. A clip that holds the tension you sensed, shown with a curious tone. When the truth becomes an object in the middle, people engage it with less annihilation anxiety. Then, shift from debate to dialogue with the image. Ask what the data might be protecting, what the dream might be asking to feel, what the scene refuses to let vanish. This move respects the psyche's native language. Images before arguments. After that, run a real-world test that both sides can live with. A pilot that adjusts the onboarding story for one segment. 2 weeks of sharing feelings before advice in a relationship. A cut of the film that lets complexity breathe without editorial revenge. Finally, debrief with your body in the loop. Don't just ask whether the intervention worked. Ask how your nervous system behaved while you made it. Where did you brace? When did you soften? What would make the next conversation 1 degree more tolerable for everyone? Let's revisit our characters through this lens. The analyst reframes the churn insight as a design problem with a pilot attached. He resists the seduction of being the office conscience. The partner who saw early learns to pace perception with care, to use a symbolic image to soften shame, to change the choreography of celebration and lament. The filmmaker confesses her punitive impulse to herself first, then directs it into rigor rather than score settling. In each case, the person moves from identification to relation. The truth is real, but it is not who they are. How does all this connect to individuation? Jung suggests that growing up psychologically is not about sanding down your gifts so you can pass in public. It is about widening your capacity to hold opposites. Loyalty and honesty, speed and patience, precision and tenderness. The ego's job is not to be right, it is to be in right relation to the self, the deeper center that sets the pace of real change. The image I return to is not a battlefield, but a labyrinth. On a battlefield, force wins. In a labyrinth, attention wins. Each turn reveals the next only if you're listening. Seeing ahead helps, but humility keeps your feet moving. There are cultural stakes here. We live in a moment that rewards the loud reveal and punishes sustained stewardship. The internet crowns prophets daily, then discards them tomorrow. But individuation is not spectacle. It is the slow art of learning when to speak, how to speak, and where to plant the seed so it can take. If you're the kind of person who senses collective problems before others do, environmental strain baked into ordinary habits, spiritual hunger disguised as cynicism, technological futures most don't want to imagine, you'll be tempted to broadcast. Sometimes that's right. Often, the braver move is local. One room, one relationship, one artifact shaped so well that it changes the next conversation's weather. A brief word about pitfalls that pull perceptive people off course. Inflation dresses up as conviction. When you feel urgently right, pause. Ask whether urgency is coming from the present situation or from older training where you had to read the room to stay safe. Withdrawal dresses up as wisdom. They're too unconscious to engage, might be true sometimes, but if it becomes a lifestyle, it's usually loneliness in a robe. Helping can become a disguise for avoidance. Rescuing others spares you from facing your own unlived life. And even after seasons of balance, stress can pull you back into fusion with the crowd or into the role of solitary prophet. None of this means you've failed. It means you're alive. Integration is rhythmic, not static. What practices help you maintain rhythm? Regular solitude where your own voice can re-emerge from the chorus of absorbed signals. Intentional choices about when to turn your receptors up and when to turn them down. Ongoing shadow work that lets you meet in yourself what you can't stand to see in others. Honest companions who can reality check you without dulling you. Creative expression that gives excess perception somewhere to go besides your bloodstream. These aren't chores. They're ways of loving your gift so it doesn't eat you. Let's land the earlier reveal. The clearer you see, the more modest you must become, in the old sense of modesty as proportion. You are a steward of images, not their owner. You are a translator, not a judge. The aim is not to see less. It is to see wisely. Wisdom is measured by what your seeing makes possible. Repair, redesign, reconciliation. Not by the number of times you can say, "I told you so." A tight recap. Perception isn't the problem. Identification is. Groups protect their masks by projecting shadow onto the person who names what hurts. If you're that person, your task is to stay in relationship. To the image you've found, to your own body, to the people who flinch. Small containers beat grand gestures. Pilots beat pronouncements. Images open hearts faster than arguments. Integration is the art of pacing truth so that it can actually be used. If one line should travel with you after this, let it be this. Insight turns into medicine when the one who carries it remains in conversation, inside and out. This channel is educational and not a substitute for therapy. If this episode resonated, tell me one place in your life where you saw a pattern before others did, and what you wish you'd known about pacing and delivery in that moment. Add your story in the comments so others can learn from it. If you found this useful, like the video, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. Share it with someone who might be carrying more than their fair share of seeing. You're watching Deep Psyche Lab, and I'm glad you're here. See you at the next turn in the labyrinth.